We are almost there, and this evening I am joined by these two gentlemen whom I will introduce shortly. We are talking about accountability in capital investments and strategic national projects. As you know, with what's happening with the hydrocarbon space and green hydrogen and so on, so many capital investments that are happening, which is great because of like in terms of our ports and in terms of this, investments that are happening in terms of purchases and national projects and so on. So we want to know, we talk corporate governance and we talk about effective control, we talk about good stewardship and so on. And so we want this also to reflect at national level. And so we want to talk about that. I have Mr. Mali Lilukela. No, I had it wrong. Mr. Lilukela, and he's an economist and he will introduce him shortly. And I have Mr. Steve Galloway, our director at NICG. So before we get started, maybe just tell us a little bit about who you are and your background and sort of your interest in the subject.
Good evening, and thank you very much for inviting me here. My name is Mali, like you said. There isn't really much to talk about. I'm an economist who has a keen interest in the Namibian economy. I follow a lot the developments, socio-economic development that are taking place in Namibia for one simple reason: to be updated, to be part of, and to be able to make an input that will hopefully influence the development in a positive direction. In terms of background, like I've said, I'm an economist. I studied economics, and I have had work exposure with the banking sector, with the regulator, and also in academia. And now I am doing private consulting, which is giving me very good opportunity to learn as much as I can about the economy. So that's basically it.
Thank you, Mali. And I have Mr. Steve Galloway here, who doesn't like to be called Mr. Thank you for being here. I mean, us trying to find speakers looks like it's a sticky topic and nobody really wanted to discuss this. And so hopefully we can see why and why this is so sticky. So thank you for joining us. Tell us about you. I'm sure everybody knows you.
Thanks, Eva. Yeah, I've been in private and public sector. I'm now retired and I just serve on various boards, a couple of boards. My early experience was as a geologist and then as a mineral economist. So I'm much more clued up on mineral economics than I am on general economics. I've served as a banker for 18 years. So if you like, I've seen the sort of practical side of implementing projects in Namibia. And I've returned now to boards of both social nature and some commercial boards, where I see the good and the bad of governance. Thank you.
So let's just get right into it then. Namibia is currently experiencing like a wave of large-scale capital investments as I started, from ports and logistics to hydrogen and energy infrastructure. How would you characterize the governance environment surrounding these investments? I don't know whether we should start with you, Steve, or the governance. Like, are we prepared to?
Yeah, maybe I should start. And I didn't mention that I was also part of the development plans. I've been involved with all the development plans in some capacity, normally as a commentator, but I was in fact quite close to Harambee too, and I'll make some comments on that. Are we ready? No, you can never be ready for something that's as big and as sort of challenging as this. But there's time to get ready. We certainly weren't ready at independence, but we set up a framework at independence, which I think the Namibian government can be very proud of, in respect of mineral governance, in respect of oil and gas governance. And we didn't have any oil, we had some gas. So I think if you align all of government into it and you get in the right sort of expertise, you can get ready quite quickly. But are we ready now? Definitely not.
Okay. Let me have Mali answer, and then I would want to unpack why we're not ready. Go ahead. Do you want to comment, add on that, or talk about?
Yeah, no, I just want to add on what he says, and I do agree with him that there are some, to an extent, there's room for improvement in terms of governance. But I would like to start with bringing into the picture as to why are we doing this? Why capital projects? And why now? you see, if one looks at where Namibia as a country is coming from, 35 years after independence, we still don't have enough to write home about. We still don't have enough good story to write home about. We, in other words, it's a polite way of saying we haven't developed that much as we should have. And massive investment in capital projects is one of the response of government to try and speed up inclusive growth, to try and speed up acceleration of some of the national aspiration that we have. Now, for 35 years, surely we should have seen some positive results, and we haven't seen much of that. One of the reasons is because the story has not been told as it's supposed to be, meaning we haven't seen the full fruition of the capital projects in terms of results. When you invest this much money, you expect to see certain results, and the mismatch between investment and the result is what gives rise to the question of whether these projects have been managed or have been governed. Exactly. And hence, because of this massive investment and interest into these projects, there is really time is ripe now to discuss the element of governance, which is a key ingredient in the fruition and successful achievement of those targets of these massive projects.
But that's exactly the thing, right? So before any windfall comes, because this is the thing. It seems like the time periods are quite long. I mean, even when we're speaking of oil and gas, so what does accountability look like in that sense? Who should be holding the pen on long-term public value? How do we manage this?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's also a very, very valid question. But we must ask ourselves a question as in terms of what exactly are we talking about when we say accountability in this context? Who is supposed to be accountable? Who is supposed to play the accountable role? From where I am sitting, really, accountability in this context is that sense of feeling responsibility or being responsible for the outcomes of the project or of the endeavor, of the plan. Now, in this particular instance, one of the reasons why we have not seen good result, we are pinning it to lack of accountability. And we are saying that the project implementers or the project administrator have not really shown that much accountability, or they have not exercised the functions of accountability given unto them. So who is supposed to account for that? Well, it's the whole system. I think we're going to talk about that later on. But the point I'm trying to say is that we are yet to see project implementers taking accountability, being responsible for the whole process, including the outcome of the project. And that's where I think we need to do more.
Okay. All right. Steve, do you want to comment on that? And maybe also unpack a little bit what you said about us not being ready. Why you say that?
Yeah. So I think the general rules are okay, and those were set up pretty solidly after independence. So we set up a good framework for mining, for oil and gas, etc. But 35 years later, those had to have been advanced and matured and fine-tuned and haven't been. The framework that we operate under, the National Development Plans and then the Harambee Plans, has in the past been a little bit siloed and fragmented. I like the structure of NDP6 because I think it leads to what has been described as an all-of-government approach. The streamlining of the cabinet, I think, is great, and the accountability that flows from NDP6 to a few key ministries is better than the fragmented approach we had before. Infrastructure, for example, used to be its own pillar, and I argued against that. I argued for the last 10 years that infrastructure should be embedded in each pillar, so economic infrastructure, social infrastructure, etc. And I think NDP6 lends itself to that. But the detail has still got to be thrashed out. And I think the reason I say we're not ready is because we've caught the bus now. We've been preparing for a long time. And in respect of oil and gas, we've caught the bus. In respect of hydrogen, I think we've run ahead of ourselves. And I think haven't created that framework in a timely fashion, and I'll come back to that as well. But for oil and gas, we've got the basic building blocks, but we need to be very competitive very quickly so as not to lose this momentum that we need to keep right now. Mining has been a long process and also needs to be put back on the burner so that we can really be competitive in the mining sector as well. Because it's mining initially and then oil and gas and then maybe hydrogen that's going to drive the sort of resource base. I'm not talking about agriculture, where NDP 6 has got a really, really important emphasis on agriculture and on some of the other resource areas. So I think the structure is right, but I think the accountability needs to be fleshed out quickly. The capacity needs to be created in those ministries that are now multitasked ministries. And we need to bring in real expertise in areas where we don't necessarily have expertise, like oil and gas and hydrogen for that matter. We really need to bring in world-class expertise like we did 35 years ago, but we need new expertise now to really take us to cutting edge and for us not to miss what is a huge opportunity for this country to propel this economy forward.
Sure. I don't want to go into what we're speaking about on Thursday because we're talking about, mining ownership and things like that, especially in the lens of competitiveness and so on. But yeah, I mean, these are some of the risks that we are pointing out now. What other risks maybe do we see that emerge in this period of high capital investments? Like which do we think, what risks might we be overlooking as we... Because the concern and why we're having this conversation is that we don't want to put out so much money and then, like other countries who've shot themselves in the foot and then we go into debt and things like that, and then it hasn't been calculated properly in terms of investment and then windfall.
No, you are quite right. I think without focusing very much on oil and gas, I would like to open up the investment into the broader spectrum, where we see government participating in some of these major investment projects. Now, the risks there are sometimes quite obvious, and we need to try and avoid those, because if we don't avoid them, then we stand a chance of really not benefiting or deriving the value for money. Now, for me, really, in every endeavor of this magnitude, government or whoever is responsible for ensuring the successful of the project must be wary of the fact that there is money that's involved, and if that has to be taken into account, we must ensure that these projects are done on time. We have seen many projects that have been dragging for years. If there was accountability, this project would be done in the stipulated time, within budget. We have seen major projects, especially where government is involved, having budget overruns, and this creates a very sticky situation whereby government now, as we speak, we are overburdened with debt to try and get money so that we can at least jumpstart some of the projects. There are challenges, or there are risks when it comes to quality. I mean, if you look at, in general, project or capital project that government has vested interest, the picture out there in most cases is that the quality, the workmanship, sometimes to a point where government have decided to stop the whole project altogether because the quality is not reflecting the investment. And also then it boils down to the whole issue of who is to be accountable.
Exactly.
There is no consequences for not being accountable, for not doing what you're supposed to do. And for me, really, in a nutshell, this sort of summarizes the key risks that are associated with massive capital of which government is involved, and there is no strict presence of accountability. If we take that a little bit into projects that are of PPP nature, with this private-public involvement, the ballgame is slightly different. There, in the private sector, there's capacity there, and there's skills. So those projects have come out a little bit different from those that are predominantly government because of the skills. And I think that it's time that government really domesticate these skills so that it can be applied to all of the projects. With this new wave of capital project and investment, really government must really embrace this so that we can mitigate some of these risks. But the most important thing is to identify and preempt the risks before they occur.
Steve, do you want to add to that? And who does that?
Yeah, perhaps just to add to Mali's comment on PPPs, I served on the PPP board, and when I retired from being a banker, and bankers, of course, are accused of only doing those projects which are obviously commercial. So the projects that are sort of in the balance, traditional banks don't do apparently. So it was interesting for me to chair a committee which in 2017 looked at the 200 billion of pipeline projects that Bank of Namibia had on the cards. We whittled that down to about 100 billion, given a 5-year sort of horizon that we were given to look at by the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Public Enterprises. So in sort of broad numbers, it was 100 billion of water, energy, transport projects across the economy. And we tried to bring in the private sector thinking on all of these, but through a PPP lens. So each one had to have a public component, and PPP Act hadn't really been passed by then, it was being finalized. So we looked at it through that lens, and we concluded that of the 100 billion, about 70 billion was likely to be financed either in a PPP framework or by private funding, which was very encouraging. And what we said to government then is that government should really be spending its capital budget on social infrastructure, on schools, housing, rural development, etc., not on these big capital projects. And we really hope that that would be the change in thinking in government, especially since the PPP Act came in soon after that. And it's been a frustration to me and a disappointment that I was part of that PPP and part of that sort of categorization of risk across capital projects, which we thought we had the solutions for. And I think I'm correct in saying that not a single PPP project has been implemented through the PPP unit. There have been a few public entities like Namport that have in fact succeeded. But I think time is now, because it's not 200 million on the pipeline anymore, it's hundreds of 200 billion, it's hundreds of billions if you look at the long pipeline. And I think unless we really get the PPP environment in a better state now, we're not going to meet our targets. And we'll come back, I think, to how you categorize and how you prioritize projects, even in that PPP context, but certainly in a government context. They can't fund everything, and in fact, they should fund as little as possible on the government budget, given that the commercial imperatives that you bring through PPP or through private sector will guide the ranking of projects. And I know that's a controversial statement because politicians want to decide which projects are priority projects, and we can come back to that.
So what can we learn from other countries? I mean, we've seen other African countries like Ghana, Mozambique, Angola as well, who've run into problems for front-loading. What are some of the lessons that we can learn from them? Because they front-loaded infrastructure and in debt in anticipation of future revenues. What can we learn from them? It kind of maybe have covered some of that, but maybe unpack it a little bit more.
Yeah, learning is a very interesting process. But when I think of it, there are very, very few countries in Africa that can really provide good learning for
lessons.
Namibia. I mean, Ghana is a very good example. But remember, Ghana just got out of the IMF box recently because they have overborrowed themselves such that they were one of the case study for the IMF. So yes, to an extent they've managed to put up infrastructure, some of them very, very good based on the debt. But for me, really what is important here is what we can learn from Ghana, including all those other ones, because the best teacher is the one that have failed and then have become successful.
So like what we could have learned what not to do.
Yes, so we could learn, we can learn what not to do from Ghana and Angola and some of those. But what is very, very important for me is investment in capacity. many times some of these national projects are failing because there is no capacity to manage and govern this. In as much as we can get Chinese who are experienced, like super engineers, but we need people who can govern and align these processes to our legislative frameworks. And I like the point that Steve mentioned. There is still a need to strengthen our legislative framework so that we have space that we are empowered to oversee, to monitor within the confines of the law specific for Namibia. And for me, number one, we need to create that environment. We need to have legislative framework that speaks to the need for a thorough monitor and evaluation oversight function given to specific bodies. I know that we're going to talk about the oversight later, but I think for me, we need to first and foremost invest in making sure that the implementers, the governors of these projects understand what it is that they must do. That's number one. Number two, the front-loading approach, it's not really very good, because what we are saying is, you see, when we embark on this capital project, the challenge we have, especially in Africa, Namibia, is that we need to convince the young people that we are not going to give you money today because we are going to invest this money for tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes, young people are saying, but oh, we still don't have the thing that you promised. And the issue here I'm trying to say is that we need to have an approach where we are convinced, where we convince especially the young people that to give us the chance to invest the money now. Now, if we are going to overborrow, it will become very difficult for us to convince the young people that there's future for you. So for me, I think we have seen this happening in these countries that we have mentioned, and we can avoid those so that at least we chart a different pace for ourselves.
Steve, you want to add to that? And yeah, maybe speak to the oversight bodies. What do we have structurally and technically? What is ready there? I mean, you talked about the PPP board and stuff, but how is that, if made in effect, how is that affected, and who is in charge, or who governs that?
Yeah, so the PPP Act was a reasonable act, but the sort of bureaucracy involved with it and the structural setting of the PPP unit within the Ministry of Finance just made it extremely cumbersome. And every time the PPP unit or committee, as they call the board, would get going, there'd be an override from a cabinet committee, for example, to say this is what's been decided at the cabinet level. And I could understand, because there was so little capacity in that unit. I can understand that somebody like a Namport or a Nampower got frustrated and felt that they could do it better. So a couple of PPPs went ahead. But I think if you're going to set up a proper PPP framework that works, it's got to be in some centralized agency. And I think it does belong in finance. It's ironic for me that the Minister of Finance, who's now a backbencher, was appealing in the parliamentary committee for more flexibility in recruitment in government. And it was that very unit that really troubled us, because they couldn't bring in competitive skills into that unit. And you can never do it through consultants. You know, consultants can help on the side, but you must never be in a position where you let consultants do the work because there's a gap there. So I don't think it's a tough task to get PPP running properly. And maybe the examples of Nampower and Namport, etc., would be a way to start. I was very concerned this week when I saw that Namport were going for their second PPP and put that out as a request in the press, and then were told, allegedly, by government to cancel that. And there might be other reasons behind that. Maybe we're not ready for that particular PPP. But I think we've got to get into the PPP space quite quickly and become competitive in that space across all capital projects. And I think NDP 6 lends itself to a more integrated approach. So I'm hopeful that we'll get there now.
So you think that's adequate in terms of an oversight body like that, is that sufficient, or what does oversight look like for the Parliament, for whatever the Auditor General or the public procurement authorities in terms of having proper oversight bodies, or providing proper oversight rather?
Look, I think it's a combination of all of those. And I was just saying to Mally before we came online, I like the energy that's coming out of the parliamentary committees.
Okay.
There are a number of very agile and very enthusiastic people on those committees, and Mally supports one of those committees. So I think that's a great development, that you've got that level of debate coming out of parliamentary committees, and you've got parliamentarians going to mines and going to rural projects, etc., to really see on the ground whether these projects are working or not. So I think that's a great development at parliamentary level. Cabinet, as I said, I think is much leaner and more focused now. I think there's some gaps, and I think a couple of the ministries are completely overburdened and will need quick remedial action to get them going. And then I think the public entities are in a state of limbo. They were centralized under the Ministry of Public Enterprises, and now they've been sent back to their line ministries, and there are pluses and minuses for that model. But right now, I get the sense that they're at the mercy of line ministers telling them what to do. And yes, line ministers have to deliver in 3 months and 6 months, etc. But we've got to be very careful that we don't override board governance unless we have to. And I said this last time, if board governance is so bad that a line minister has to intervene,
Then the board will be fired.
then the line minister needs to replace that board.
Yeah.
That's drastic action.
Yeah.
But you can't willy-nilly override board decisions and then let the board carry on again.
Yeah.
So that's a very delicate balance that we've got to establish quite quickly. And it is early days. We're feeling our way. In general, I think the urgency now we've never seen before.
Yeah, Edla, I just want to add on something quickly. One of the things that, again, we should learn from those countries that we must try and work on is the issue of transparency.
Yes.
Some of these, I like the example that he just gave, where one morning you see an expression of interest being flighted, and the next morning it's been cancelled. You're asking yourself, but why? Because there is no information, there's lack of information in the public space to sort of justify some of these decisions. And when there's lack of information, especially if the one that's supposed to be in the public domain, and decisions are taken like this, they create suspicions and people start to speculate things. And I think that in Angola, in some of those countries, one of the reasons why chaos has erupted in the midst of all of this is because people were questioning. And it is really important for government to ensure that in all of their processes, they maintain transparencies so that there's less questions, and there's less suspicion. I wanted to mention that just before I speak to maybe 1 or 2, 3 success factors of oversight. What we have seen recently in engaging with Parliament and all these other bodies is that the more you provide adequate funding to these bodies to exercise their function, you can actually see tangible results. And what we have seen is that they need more resources to be able to do oversight, physical oversight, not just to go through reports, but they need to go to the mines, they need to go to the projects physically and observe. They also need capacity, and we have seen, especially in terms of Parliament, we have seen a number of capacity building programs that are being rolled out. Each and every committee now has been trained in understanding their areas of undertaking, and also collaboration in international benchmarking. I think belonging to some of the best practice bodies also sort of give us an opportunity to transfer skills and knowledge that we can put into ours. So if we do some of those things, we are definitely going to up the game and avoid some of those pitfalls that we may find along the way.
Maybe just remind us, what are these oversight bodies that we have? What structures do we currently have that are providing oversight and making sure there's accountability? What do we have?
Yes. So, quickly one, I think the two that stands out for me. Number one is Office of the Auditor General, that looks at government books. Although it's mainly ex post, meaning like after the budget has been executed, but they do a good job, because then they prepare these reports that get sent to Parliament for this committee to thoroughly scrutinize and ask questions and make recommendations. So Office of the Auditor General is quite important in this space. Number two, the Parliament. The Parliament have got what's called standing committees. These are subcommittees in Parliament that looks at specific areas to give Parliament that closer eye to observe, to oversight, control and manage. So these two institutions for me are quite important for making sure that processes are accountable, they are responsible, and they avoid all these general pitfalls. There are other also extra bodies that we can mention, but these two for me stands out. And if these are capacitated with resources, with knowledge, with support, I think they can really up the game.
Because I know we mentioned some gaps. I know, Steve, you said they are overburdened. What other gaps are there that we can point out?
Yeah, perhaps just on the bodies. Today, in fact, the Planning Commission was inaugurated. I haven't seen who the new commissioners are, the new Planning Commission. And to me, that's like a super board. If that Planning Commission really has the right sort of diversity of skills, then the Planning Commission as a body can become extremely capacitated and useful. The other one that's somehow linked, because I used to serve on the APRM Council, the Africa Peer Review Council, and they're also housed in the Planning Commission. And that's an Africa-wide body. And I think that concept is brilliant, that your peers in Africa, rather than the Bretton Woods institutions, are the ones who benchmark you based on African experience. And the report that we got from our peers and we commented on was a very, very valuable report. That led to a program of action, which I'm afraid wasn't implemented. But I think you'll find a lot of overlap between that and NDP6. So those two bodies, I think, are very important. And that African experience is extremely important for us, that it's not IMF or IFC or World Bank or whatever telling us what's wrong with our ratios. It's our own colleagues in Africa. And there's good and bad on that, of course. So the gaps that I mentioned in paring down cabinet, and I think it was a very bold move to go from 22 ministries to 14, from 22 deputy ministers to 7. I think that was really dramatic. You don't see that level of cutting in the private sector. And maybe it's a little overdone, because I've already seen a couple of ministries that have such a broad mandate and not, in my view, the skills to really get up and go fast, which is what the president is asking them to do. And the Ministry of Mines and Energy is an obvious one. They still have an oil and gas responsibility, even though there's an oil and gas office in the presidency. The law still gives them responsibility for oil and gas, and that needs to be sorted quite quickly. So that ministry, I think, is completely overburdened. The other one that I think is overburdened is the Ministry of Agriculture and which has got such a broad remit that I think they need some firefighting there, because that's a key sector of the economy. All of those areas under the new Minister of Agriculture, etc., which have to deliver NDP6. So I think those are two. Education, I think it made a whole lot of sense to bring all of those together. Youth, sport, education, innovation, all of that. But maybe some capacity there to really let them get going. But I like the consolidation and the sort of alignment, and it makes it that much easier to get going from day one. But gaps there are, there's no question.
Thank you, Steve. You spoke earlier about transparency and what that looks like. And in Namibia, our procurement is kind of opaque. Like we don't do too well with regards to that. How do we build more transparency and integrity into our project pipelines? How do we ensure transparency, better transparency?
Yeah, I think the central point of transparency is to make a commitment to conduct yourself ethically everywhere, anytime, without somebody looking at. And that takes long to build. But what is important is that you need to provide a conducive environment where such characteristics can be sharpened. What we don't have, which we need to build, is to create a legislative framework that will promote such. We don't have much of that right now. So when it comes to procurement, we see that the lack of that environment creates a situation where procurement is done in a sort of opaque way. We need to promote communication. We need to ensure that the public that we are trying to serve participate one way or the other, at least even at the information level. That we don't do. And number two, we must make sure that when there are issues that need to be corrected, let them be corrected. And if there's somebody is found not to be disciplined one or the other, let that be known, because this creates confidence. The challenge we have with a body like that one is that the public has lost confidence in its mandate, and they have a lot of work to do to bring in that confidence. And all of these things centers around one thing: communication, open. So we have bodies that, like Africa Peer Review, that have made some of the recommendations. Some of the recommendation is that bring in public participation. Let the civil service organization also comes in. That way you are cultivating and building confidence in your processes, which ties in very well with maintaining good governance.
Yeah, because that was going to be my next question. Like, how can we as civil society demand accountability before these projects are even built? And how can the pressure be put on without being like adversarial, but more like, be more constructive and so on.
Maybe before Steve comes in, on that aspect, I think there is some work already being done in that space. From the government side of view, when a capital project is initiated, there is a whole structured way of consulting the public from grassroots. So when the budget is put together, the Minister of Finance does their own consultation, especially on the operational part. The National Planning Commission does their consultations, regions and constituents on the capital budget. So they have a structure in which they do that. But they need to do more, because we're being advised by Open Budget Survey, of which Namibia is being rated and surveyed on. We need to do more, because at the end of the day, when you go to the region and ask, were you aware that government was bringing a project like this to you? They'll be like, no, we didn't know. Who told us? No one came here. So consultation need to still be taken so down so that everybody is included. Inclusive consultation. We need to do that. Steve?
Yeah, I think it has improved, the open budget process. And it's because of civil society organizations. IPPR has been very, very insistent that budget process should be opened up. Civil society participating in all of this dialogue has really been done by IPPR. And I think organizations like NICG can really open it up. And I think the Fireplace Conversations have done that. To what extent NDP 6 was consulted, I don't know. I know the Director General said it had, but it might have been consulted prior to the SWAPO Manifesto implementation plan, because it was a long process. The timing was so tight, post-SWAPO implementation plan and to the deadline of NDP 6, that I think maybe consultation wasn't adequate. But I don't think it's too late. I think it's appropriate that we really bring civil society and private sector bodies into that NDP 6 implementation, because it's a great document, but the implementation of it still needs a lot of fleshing out. And I think a number of constituencies can still add a whole lot of value to that plan, so that it really does become an active plan, not something that we look at in 4 or 5 years' time and lament why we didn't hit our targets.
Yeah, that brings us to future-proofing for sustainability. But I think before I do that, I just want to know if there are any comments online. Do we have anyone online at all? And we have one person in the audience here. Do you have any questions? Maybe introduce yourself, and if you have comments or questions.
Thank you very much. I need to stand or?
No, you can sit down. You're fine.
All right. No, thanks very much. I feel very special that I'm the only person here. Just to comment and commend you for still going ahead and forging on with these fireplace conversations. I think they're quite important and they open up the conversation as they're meant to. And the discussion here, is proof of the importance of these type of conversations because these are key national matters that we need to be discussing and we need to be engaging on. And if we don't, we run the risk of blaming ourselves later on and asking ourselves what happened, when in fact we could have had and could have been part of the conversation, could have made our voices heard. And I think that's the trouble I've noticed with us as a society, that we most of the time wake up when it's too late and start pointing fingers and shifting blame, when in fact we could be advising government. Some of the comments that have been made here today, for example, are quite key and critical, that need to be understood and need to be delivered to the doors of those in power, those in administration, of the pitfalls and the roadblocks that they need to be looking out for. And I think it's just important that this type of dialogues and conversation keep happening, especially when it comes to key matters of national importance and what government could do better to make sure that there's better implementation, that there's controls around possible leakages, etc. So yeah, job well done.
Thank you so much. We didn't catch your name, sir.
Oh, sorry, my name is Julius Mikevali, and I'm currently with NIDA.
Okay, and you're also a member of the NICG.
I am a member, yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. All right, so there are no other comments online. All right. So we want to talk about future-proofing investments, or these for sustainability, and there's a strong narrative around enabling infrastructure for prosperity. What does sustainable enabling investment look like? And maybe we may have touched on this before, but what does it look like in socially, fiscally, and environmentally? I don't know if you want to go first, Steve.
Yeah, to me, the enabling part is not infrastructure, unless there really are gaps. Our study in 2017 showed that most of the physical infrastructure can be done in public-private partnerships or by the private sector. The infrastructure that government must set up is the enabling frameworks. And if government makes it competitive to come to this country, whether it be for hydrogen or for oil and gas or for mining or for agri-projects, green schemes, manufacturing, whatever, the investors will come. It's a great country. People love to come here. But that enabling environment, which goes as far as work permits and access to the country, etc., the skills framework that we offer in the country, it's those social infrastructure elements, if you like, but most importantly, the policy frameworks must be in place. We're on the brink of major investment decisions, but only if government finalizes the last bits of, for example, oil and gas framework. The mining enabling environment has always been good, but of late, and in NDP 6, there's a very dramatic change in the environment threatened. It's not to say it'll happen, and I don't think it will happen. That's the 51 to 60% ownership in NDP 6. Things like that undo so much good work. And I think in the next year, government really has to focus on that environment, because the capital that will come into the country is far in excess of anything that we can possibly raise here, if the environment is right. I don't believe in the maxim, build it and they'll come, because we don't know exactly what to build. We know what our potential is, and we must get the environment right and the frameworks right. And then the private sector will build, and government can fill in around them, if you like. But going too early and building things that we think we need is sometimes going to cost us dearly.
Yeah.
And we simply don't have the capital, and we don't want to be any more indebted than we are already.
Exactly.
So it's the framework. It's
Yeah.
the framework, the framework, the framework.
Just before you go ahead, I just want to tell our audience that, we're discussing this competitiveness and so on Thursday. So you're having a double treat this week. You're having Fireplace tonight and on Thursday again, and we'll discuss that whole mining ownership and things on Thursday. Please go ahead.
Yes, sustainable development, he's quite right, hinges on robust legislative framework. The reason why you need robust legislative framework is to manage and control the moods.
Control?
Mood. The mood. You see, today I'm very excited, and I want to lure the young ones to vote for me, for example. And then I promise them this and this and this and this, and they vote for me. And then next year, I'm not there, somebody comes in, and he's not in the mood for the youth. Then he changes the whole plan. Now, think of the Youth Development Fund or the Valvicha Fund. If we don't have a legislative framework that will ensure that the money in the Valvicha Fund is to be used in future, if we don't have the legislative framework, that money will be used next year to pay for whatever emergency. Because in the absence of the framework, me as a new president, I am controlled by the needs that I think these are urgent. I may, using the loose framework that is there, take the money from there, and then I compromise the future. And that's why we need a legislative framework to control and ensure that sustainable development agenda and goals are maintained. Government is doing so much and so well in that aspect. We are seeing especially within the NDP 6 framework, that the National Youth Development Fund. That fund is to empower the youth today so that tomorrow they become productive. That already gives you that the intention is to save for the future. And then the issue of infrastructure then comes later. Once the youth are empowered, they have tools of trade, they have infrastructure, but they need to have been protected by the right legislative framework, like he said. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about quite a few things, because my next question was going to be, if we had to design a governance checklist, what are those, like for strategic national projects, what would be your top 3 must-haves in terms of, what we should have in place before any dollar is committed? I mean, we spoke about transparency and accountability and oversights and proper frameworks. If you have to have top 3 must-have that we should have in place before any dollar is committed, what would you say? What would those be?
So, Itla, the Investment Act is way overdue. We had a Foreign Investment Act which was brought through within a year of independence. That was okay as a Foreign Investment Act, but it wasn't that balanced Investment Act that we needed to create. 8 years ago, that was passed in Parliament, and it was held back then because it was seen to be more destructive than constructive, and it wasn't brought into force. It's almost 9 years later. That is priority number 1, and I believe the President has given instructions to get that through.
Okay.
More importantly than the timing is the content of that.
Yeah.
That sets the tone for all investment. The PPP Act I've talked about, it's basically a sound act. The implementation mechanisms of PPP need to be strengthened quickly and applied quickly through a proper agency, whether that be through individual public entities or through a centralized agency. So those 2 are absolutely critically important. Then the sectoral legislation and frameworks. We will talk in detail about mining. The Mines Act, the Minerals Act, which we did in 1992, has been modified in draft for 20 years. It must now be brought to Parliament and implemented properly. The Oil and Gas Act, which is a solid act, but it's 30 years old, must be brought and implemented quickly. So there are a few key sectoral legislations that really have to be bedded down, and the overarching investment legislation. Otherwise, you cannot expect investors to sign on the bottom line. There is an alternative, and that is an investment agreement, such as what De Beers signed with the government 30 years ago. That's under the Minerals Act, though. So that's not first prize to do that in isolation. It should be bedded down in one or other of those acts. So for me, those are the things that we must do for the next 6 months. Put everybody onto getting the most competitive investment framework with those sectoral focuses in mind. And then we'll have the basics right. And then we can move.
So again, legislative frameworks is so important again. Yes.
I think for me, really, there are three things. Number one, coordination.
Between who and who and who?
Coordination. Institutions must talk to one another.
Yeah.
What we are doing now, the silo mentality must fall. And this is hampering development in all spheres of governance. So that silo mentality must fall. So we need coordination. And already in NDB 6, there is stipulated as provision for coming up with a framework to ensure that everything that government does is in a coordinated manner. Right? If it's resource mobilization, we are awaiting the what is called the INFF, Integrated National Financing Framework. I am told it is somewhere in cabinet, awaiting approval. This will be the tool to coordinate all financial mobilization activities of government. This way, government is talking to one another so that we avoid overlaps, we avoid wastage, we improve transparency. That's number one. Number two, we need to be able to measure things. We need to invest in diagnostic studies so that our policies are evidence-based. Our direction, our advice must be supported by data on the ground. That is very important because then we have policies that at the end of the day, we really don't know whether we are speaking. This leads to misdiagnostic policies. At the end of the day, you have a very good policy, but you can't implement it because the data is not supporting. And the third thing for me really, which is very, very important, is integrated solutions. When we come up with a project, let it be in a framework where it is integrated. If we are going to build Nekatal Dam, we're going to spend 15 billion in Nekatal Dam. Let's make sure that there is a farm nearby which is going to benefit from the water that's been harvested there. If we are going to support and develop a green scheme in Kavango or Zambezi, let's make sure that there's a market ready to offtake those. Now, if we are developing and investing in silo, then we are sitting with products that are rotting. No one is offtaking them. If we are investing in biomass, we are training the youth to harvest biomass. Let's have offtake agreements from institutions so that the efforts, the products does not waste. That is an integrated solution. So for me, if we embrace this, our efforts really will begin to bear fruits quickly.
Thank you so much. I don't know, we're running out of time, but I wanted to have you sort of expand that into what is currently happening, especially in oil and gas, and what that would look like, what you just proposed. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes.
The integrated solutions.
Exactly. Again, the silo mentality must fall because it's beginning fall. It's beginning to affect also this development. This exciting development. You know what I discovered last week? There was a Garson conference. I walked around, and the title has an emphasis on youth in oil and gas. I hadn't seen a single youth in there. Yes.
Where didn't you go?
Okay. The time that I was there, there were very, very few youth. And when I'm talking about youth, I'm talking about these people that are inspired by this. They were not there. And I bumped into some of my students, and they told us, oh, but say, wherever we are going, these people are even looking at us like, what are you doing here, you kids? Now, what that told me is that the process of promoting oil and gas has not been fully entrenched in the society, in the community that really needs it. So an integrated solution would be where community is involved for us, by us. Now, in that space, I could not help but to notice the absence of the youth for which we want to promote. And this is because perhaps it was not communicated, or because the organizer of that thought that maybe the youth these youth that were there were the only youth. So I'm just trying to bring into this aspect of saying, at the end of the day, the youth of tomorrow will be like, but we were not there, we're not involved when this was planned, and so it is not ours. It's gonna lack ownership. If the youth are not involved, the youth will not be part and parcel of that. Anything that lacks ownership hardly becomes successful.
Yeah, Steve, do you want to add to that? I mean, we are nearing our closing remarks, and so I don't know if you want to add to that, and maybe just start to wrap up in terms of what is one mind shift or governance culture that would have the greatest impact on, ensuring that these capital investments truly serve like long-term interests for Namibia. Because we started talking about this because we don't want to put so much money up front and then risk, going in debt or overspending and then not seeing the rewards in time. So what are your closing thoughts or final views?
Hitler, in some ways, I think we're back where we were 35 years ago in this respect, in that 35 years ago, it was an open playbook and we could really create the future. And we sat down for 3 years and we created a Minerals Act, a Petroleum Act, the Taxation Acts that went with it, a Marine Act, a Foreign Investment Act. And we could really create that framework. 35 years later, it needs to be redone. And the challenges are different now and the opportunities are different. I really believe that with this pared down cabinet, with much more alignment and much more focus through the NDP6, we've got that opportunity again to sit down and with a one government approach, one country approach, get everybody around and say, where are the low-hanging fruit and what are like the President did. The President said by the 13th of June, she wants all of the constraints that are stopping us going to where we should be going in Vision 2030 tabled. And I'm hoping there was a serious process in tabling those constraints, because then I think we can sit around a table and have a national dialogue to say, these are the low-hanging fruit and these are the immediate legislative changes or tweaks or framework guidelines that we need to take this economy to a 7% growth rate. Because unless we engineer it like that, we're not simply going to achieve a 7% growth rate. We've got to build it from basics. And I think if we get that alignment through a more efficient cabinet, through more efficient dialogue with the private sector, with civil society, we can solve for 3 million people. We can solve for the poverty that is still keeping us back through quick economic growth. But we can't do it unless we really agree what are those areas that are going to get quick wins. And it must be a robust discussion. It mustn't just be in cabinet. It must be a robust discussion in planning commissions, in parliamentary committees, in sectoral groupings, so that we really are honest and frank on what's doable in NDP6 in a 5-year period and what's not doable in a 5-year period, and then focus on the doables.
Do you want to add to that? Do you want to do your final comments?
I think I agree with him. We have a window of opportunity here. 35 years is long enough to have learned everything that we needed to learn. We now know what pitfalls to avoid. But then again, we need to support government in ensuring that whole of government approach. And by the way, government subscribe to what is called now the Global Accelerator Initiative, whereby government is given an opportunity to review all the framework so that they come up with coherent and integrated, coordinated policy approach. So it is to promote the whole of government approach and integrated solution. So we have a good window of opportunity now. And with that, I think collectively as a nation, we can come up with something better that we can be proud of in few years to come.
Thank you, Mali. Yeah, with that, we about to wrap up. We have the last few minutes. I don't know, Kuviri, Augusta, if there are any questions online or any comments online. Well, thank you to ever say that. Yeah, I hope our audience realizes that we have these discussions because governance is important. You know, they say everything rises and falls on leadership, and governance is a leadership. It's about ethical and effective leadership, and it's not just in the boardrooms, but also at national level, and you know, all our institutions that we have. So we hope that as you are listening to this, that you also that you add your 2 cents. I don't want to say your 2 cents, but that we own this, that we own that this is our nation. This is also why we're having this theme in our corporate governance conference that is happening, that it is about collaborative nation building and so on. So thank you for being here tonight, Mr. Ngikebali, and those who are online. We hope to see you again on Thursday, same time, same place. Thank you.